This video shows how to make a shaker pincushion like this. It's very simple to do. You make cut out two circles, and what I did was, this is a peanut butter lid. I simply put that on the fabric and traced around it. It's a little bit bigger than 3.5 inches. And I added a 1/4 of an inch seam around that. This is interfacing that I ironed on. That's on the inside pieces. That way, using quilting fabric, if you stuff it with, I think some people use walnut shells, it might not look as lumpy on the outside. Also, the reason I'm using the interfacing is my hair was really long and I cut it short, and I'm stuffing my pincushion with the hair, which might sound odd, but traditionally in Japan they've been doing that for hundreds of years. I like it better than the polyester fiber feel. So you mark 1.5 inches on both pieces, because that will be your opening. And I sew over the line I marked with a different color thread. That way it shows on the other side. And I've sewed all the way around. Then you turn it. You also, that dot, you fold each piece of fabric in half, and then you fold it again into a 1/4. And you get that corner, and I marked it with an ink pen, a little tiny dot. That way, when you turn it inside out, I used a needle so I could, when I had it on the other side, and I poked the needle through, and where the needle poked through, I used a ink pen again and marked a tiny little dot on both sides. So that will be your center. The reason I sewed with the black thread is from this side you can see where that line was, and you can fold it over exactly on that line, and then you sew that opening so that line stays there, and that just keeps your seam allowance correct. You just sew on this side, like right across through there, and then that keeps the correct seam allowance. And then you stuff it, and after you stuff it well, then you sew closed that area there. You blind stitch it so your stitching doesn't show. It's called a blind stitch. I believe it's also called an invisible stitch. Now you can see what I was doing here. Where that black line is, the 1.5 inches that I over sewed. That left the seam there. And then I just sew from here to here on the outside, and that does that. And then you can stuff this, and after you stuff it, then you remove the black sewing line. It's no longer needed, and at that time the black sewing thread would get in the way when you blind stitch it shut. And please ignore the gnarly looking hands. I have been doing a lot of woodworking, and it shows on my hands. Now that the pincushion is completely sewed together, you use either embroidery thread. What I'm using is tatting thread that's size 10. Tatting is a form of lace making. You use a very long thread. It's a thick thread, about the same thickness as embroidery floss. That dot that was in the center, you put your needle straight through it so it comes out the other side. The way it goes in one side and out the other. You leave half of the thread length coming out the bottom of it. And after you go all the way through, you use of course, a very long needle. You go back down, go back to the bottom, and go straight through again. That makes one loop. And of course my needle came unthreaded. You do that 8 more times. You go around that pincushion and then loop around and go back up through the bottom again from the center. Trying to work from that same hole. And you try to keep it straight across from the first one. Then you do that 8 times. You go straight across this way and around back in. Now, I know this isn't the best video. I'm not a professional video person or anything. I'm just doing this to help people learn how to make these very easy pincushions. Once you make one, it's like riding a bike, you don't forget. You kind of, as you go, you pull this thread a little snug each time you do it. Go back up through the bottom again. And just for a little silliness, this is green, so that's for Harry Potter Slytherin house. If you prefer Gryffindor, you might go with red and gold. Being a huge Snape fan, Professor Snape, I go with Slytherin house and green. And I am over 50, but that doesn't mean I'm too old to be silly. So got one more to go, so I wrap around that space. Now there's 8 of them, and after you get 8 of them done, you loop around one of them to make a knot. Pull it through one, back through your original thread, pull it down to the center. Then you go back, you put the needle in the center, and you come out at the side where one of these threads are. There, I've come out at the side now. And what you do is you loop around that thread and you go around the side here where that seam, that way you're hiding your seam. You go to the next thread and repeat. You simply wrap around that thread. You're going through that, around that thread, making a loop. You make a loop around that thread. Go to the next one. You go under the yellow thread. After you go under it, like so, then you go back under the yellow thread again, so it makes a loop. And you continue that way all the way around. So I'm making lots of progress here. After you get your last thread looped on the side, you go down through the pincushion and come out the bottom center. Then what you do is you loop again around that thread. You go under the thread first, and then you loop back under the thread again. That makes a loop. You're going under the thread twice, and then you go. I take a pen and I mark that thread. That's the beginning thread right there. I put a pin to the side. You go back under the next thread, pull the thread through, and then go back under that thread again. This is called a spider web embroidery. These shaker pincushions go back a couple hundred years. They were done by the Shakers, and this is a very old, very traditional pattern. So you continue around each thread, all 8 of them, and when you get that done all the way around, then you come back to the one marked with the pin. When you do that, you go around again, and you go around 7 times, and then you tie your thread off and you bury your thread down into the pincushion coming out the side, and you clip it. That's all you do. So then that makes a nice little pincushion. You'll see these pincushions often, but most people don't show where you have the thread here going around, and they don't show how to do the spider web embroidery in the bottom, which this is how the Amish people did them like 200 years ago.